The dangerous encounter. On a distant planet, far from Earth, there was nothing but chaos. The planet's surface was wild and untamed. Trees towered over the land like giants, and the air was thick with the scent of strange plants. But beneath the beauty, something darker lurked in the shadows. A young alien girl named Zira was running. She had been running for hours, maybe days, but time didn't matter to her anymore. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her legs burning with every step. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let them catch her. Zira was different from most of her people. She had always been curious, always asked too many questions. That's what had gotten her into trouble. Her curiosity had led her to uncover secrets, dangerous secrets that the alien leaders did not want anyone to know. When they found out, they'd wanted her dead. Now she was a fugitive. She had tried hiding in the dense forests, but her pursuers were relentless. The alien soldiers were swift, skilled hunters. They had no mercy. They would catch her. It was just a matter of time. Zira stumbled over a large rock as she tried to speed up. She had to keep moving. She couldn't let them find her here. She glanced over her shoulder, but all she saw were the thick trees and shadows. The alien soldiers had excellent tracking abilities. She was being hunted. She didn't know what to do. Her thoughts were scattered, her mind racing for a plan. But there was nothing. The only thing she could do was keep running. She glanced ahead and saw a clearing through the trees. It was her only chance. She sprinted toward it, hoping it would lead to safety. But as she got closer, she saw something strange. At first, she thought it was just a shadow, but then she realized it was something else. It was a human on this planet. It didn't make sense. Zira had never seen a human before. She had only heard stories. They were supposed to be dangerous, too weak to survive on this harsh planet. But there he was, standing tall and calm in the clearing, watching her. The human didn't move. He didn't seem scared or surprised to see her. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. Zira hesitated. She had no time to think. The alien soldiers were getting closer, and she needed help, if this human could offer it. Without thinking, she ran toward him. But before she could get too close, the sound of the alien soldiers' boots pounding the ground reached her ears. They were almost here. The human finally moved. In one swift motion, he pulled something from his side, something shiny and metallic. It was a weapon, but not like anything Zira had seen before. It was sleek, designed for quick, efficient action. The human aimed the weapon at the trees, and before Zira could understand what was happening, a loud blast echoed through the air. The trees splintered, and one of the alien soldiers dropped to the ground, unconscious. Zira stood frozen in shock. She had never seen anything like that before. The human moved again, taking cover behind a nearby rock. He wasn't running. He was standing his ground. He was ready to fight. The alien soldiers were confused for a moment, unsure of where the attack had come from. But they quickly recovered. More blasts rang out from the soldiers' weapons, but the human was faster. He dodged and fired back with precision. Zira could only watch as the battle unfolded in front of her. She could see that the human wasn't just a fighter. He was skilled. His movements were quick and precise, like he had been through countless battles before. The alien soldiers were no match for him. In just a few minutes, the first wave of soldiers had been taken down. Zira could hardly believe her eyes. She should have been running. She should have been escaping. But something about the human caught her attention. He wasn't just saving her from the soldiers. He was showing her something she had never seen before: strength, fearlessness, and something even more surprising: humanity. She had heard the stories about humans being weak, primitive, but this human was nothing like that. He was strong. He was powerful. And most importantly, he wasn't afraid. Zira's breath came in short gasps. She didn't know what to do. She had never been in a situation like this before. She wasn't a fighter. She didn't know how to survive against these soldiers. She had no choice but to trust this human. He was her only chance, As the last soldier fell to the ground, the human lowered his weapon and turned to face Zira. His eyes were focused, serious, but not unkind. He looked at her, then gestured for her to follow him. Without a word, he began to move toward the forest, disappearing into the thick trees. Zira stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. This was the first time in her life that she wasn't in control of the situation. But in that moment, she realized something. This human, this strange, dangerous human, was her only hope. She quickly followed him, staying close, and together they disappeared into the wilderness, hoping to escape the soldiers, and hoping that the human could lead her to safety. The first glimpse of humanity. Zira's heart was still racing as she followed the human into the forest. The sounds of the battle slowly faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of strange creatures. She stayed close to him, her feet moving almost instinctively. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew she had no choice but to trust him. After all, he had just saved her life. The human didn't speak as they moved through the thick trees, his pace steady, his movements efficient. Zira watched him closely, trying to understand what kind of person he was. The way he moved was unlike anything she had ever seen. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even worried. Most beings would have been terrified after facing such a dangerous enemy, but the human acted as though it was just another day for him. Zira glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His dark clothing blended with the shadows, making him look almost like a part of the forest itself. His face was serious, his eyes sharp and focused, scanning the area around them for any danger. But even with all that, there was something about him that intrigued her. She had never seen a human before. She had only heard stories that painted them as weak and easily defeated. But this human was different. The stories had lied. He wasn't weak. He was strong, confident, and capable in ways she had never imagined. "Who are you?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence between them. Her voice was cautious, unsure of how he would respond. The human didn't immediately answer. He continued walking, his steps sure and steady. After a few moments, he spoke without looking at her. "I'm just someone trying to survive. Like you." Zira frowned. "But why help me? You don't even know me. Why save me?" The human's eyes flicked over to her for just a moment, a brief glance. "I don't need to know you to know what's right. The enemy you're running from isn't something I'm going to ignore. It's my job to stop them." Zira was silent. She didn't understand what he meant by job, but his words stuck with her. There was something strange about this human. He didn't seem afraid of the danger he was in, and he didn't ask questions about her. Most beings would have been curious, especially about someone like her. But he wasn't. He was focused on the task at hand, on survival. They continued through the dense forest, Zira trying to keep up with his quick pace. Her legs were sore, and she could feel the weight of exhaustion beginning to catch up with her. But she didn't dare stop. She had to keep moving. They reached a small clearing, and the human finally slowed down. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the trees, as if searching for any signs of danger. When he was satisfied that they were safe for the moment, he finally spoke again. "We need to keep moving. They'll be looking for us soon." Zira nodded, though she had no idea where they were going. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched down and began pulling something from his bag, a small device that looked like a communication tool. He pressed a few buttons, and the device lit up, showing a map of the planet. "We're heading toward a safe zone. It's the only place we can be sure they won't find us." Zira stared at the map, confused. She didn't recognize the terrain, but she trusted him. For now. As they resumed their journey, Zira couldn't help but wonder. Who was this human? What was he really doing here? She had heard of human explorers, but she had never imagined one would come to her planet. She had never imagined one would save her life. She watched him closely as they walked. There was a quiet strength about him, something unspoken but clear. He didn't need to boast or explain himself. He just did what needed to be done. And in that moment, Zira realized something. This human wasn't like the stories. He wasn't weak. He was strong, brave, and most surprisingly, he was kind. For the first time since she'd started running, Zira felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human could help her escape the dangers of her world. Maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for. They walked in silence for a while, and Zira found herself glancing at him more often than she had before. She couldn't figure him out, but she was beginning to understand one thing. Humans were not what she had thought. They were more, much more. And maybe, if she was lucky, she would learn just how much. The mysterious rescuer. As the hours passed, Zira couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The human had led her through the thick forests, and now they found themselves in a small, hidden cave nestled between sharp rock formations. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place, at least for the time being. She watched as the human worked quickly, setting up a small camp with a few simple tools he carried in his bag. He didn't speak much, but his movements were precise, almost methodical. It was as if he had done this before, many times. But what struck Zira was that he wasn't rushing, despite the fact that they had just survived an ambush. He was calm, almost too calm. Zira sat in the far corner of the cave, trying to get some rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was too busy, too full of questions. Who was this human? Why had he helped her? What did he want? She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this confused, this unsure of everything around her. She had always known her place in the world, always understood the rules of survival. But this human, he didn't follow any of the rules she had ever known. He wasn't like the other aliens she had encountered, and he wasn't like her people. He was different, and that made him unpredictable. At last, she couldn't stay silent anymore. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the cave. "You don't even know me. You don't even know what I've done. Why risk your life for someone like me?" The human didn't look up at first. He was sharpening a small knife, his focus entirely on the task. When he did speak, his voice was low, steady. "I don't need to know everything about you to know what's right. You're being hunted. I'm not going to let that happen to you." Zira blinked, surprised by the simplicity of his answer. He didn't care about the details. He didn't need to know her past, her mistakes, or her secrets. All that mattered to him was that she needed help. "That's it?" she asked, feeling a mix of disbelief and relief. "You're just helping because it's the right thing to do." The human finally looked up, locking eyes with her. His gaze was intense, but not hostile. Sometimes, doing the right thing is all that matters. Zira stared at him, trying to understand what he meant. It didn't make sense to her. Her world was full of conflict, full of survival at any cost. She had always been taught to trust only herself, to rely on no one but her own abilities. But this human was different. He was showing her a kind of strength that didn't come from fighting or running. It came from something deeper, something she didn't fully understand. For the first time in hours, Zira allowed herself to relax slightly. She leaned back against the cold stone of the cave wall and closed her eyes, but sleep still wouldn't come. She had too many questions, too many doubts swirling in her mind. The human finished his task and set the knife down. He stood, moving to the entrance of the cave, his silhouette framed by the dim light outside. Zira watched him, wondering where he had come from, what kind of life he had led before he ended up here, saving a stranger. He had told her that he was just trying to survive, but Zira had a feeling there was more to him than that. Something in the way he carried himself, something in the quiet confidence he exuded told her that he wasn't just a random explorer or soldier. There was a purpose behind everything he did. He wasn't here by accident. The silence between them stretched on. Zira could feel the weight of the question on her tongue, but she hesitated to ask it. It was a question that might reveal more than she was ready to learn, but she couldn't keep it in any longer. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What's your purpose here? Why are you really helping me?" For a moment, the human didn't answer. He simply stood there, his back to her, staring out into the distance. Then, very slowly, he turned around, his face unreadable. "My name is Darian," he said simply. "And as for the rest, I'm not here for you, Zira. I'm here for everyone. I'm part of a group that's been trying to stop the war you're running from. I've been sent to protect people like you, and to stop the forces that want to destroy everything." Zira blinked, her mind racing. This human was part of something bigger, something much bigger than herself. He wasn't just a lone wanderer. He was a soldier, a protector. She had no idea how to respond. As the weight of his words settled in, Zira realized something else, something even more shocking. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. Not because of her own skills, not because of her ability to hide, but because of him. This human, Darian, was her protector even if she didn't fully understand the danger they were facing. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to herself or to Darian. "No one ever does," he replied quietly, his gaze softening for the briefest moment. "But sometimes it's the ones who don't ask for it that make the biggest difference." The alien forces close in. The calm of the cave was short-lived. Zira had only just begun to settle into the strange, uneasy peace that had come with Darian's presence when the unmistakable sound of distant footfalls echoed through the narrow opening of the cave. At first, she thought it was just the wind, the shifting of the planet's atmosphere, but the rhythm was too deliberate, too certain. The alien forces were getting closer. Zira's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, her eyes wide with panic, and immediately looked toward Darian. But he hadn't moved. He was still sitting at the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering glow of the flame. His expression was calm, almost detached, as if he had already known this moment was coming. Zira's breath quickened. How could he stay so calm? "They're here," she whispered, her voice strained with fear. Darian didn't respond right away. He simply stood, as though he were in no rush. His movements were slow, deliberate, his hands reaching for his weapon, the one that had saved her life only hours ago. It was hard for Zira to believe this quiet, unassuming human could be capable of such controlled violence, but there was no doubt in her mind anymore. Darian was different. "They'll find us, won't they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes flicked to her, as though he had been expecting her question. "They're already here." Zira's pulse hammered in her chest. The alien soldiers were relentless, trained to track and hunt their prey without mercy. She had never encountered anything like them before. They were deadly and efficient, and if they found them, it would be over. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the mouth of the cave, a branch snapping, followed by the low hum of alien weapons charging up. The soldiers were near, too near. Zira backed away from the entrance, her heart racing. She wanted to run, to escape, but Darian's presence was grounding her in place. Despite her fear, despite everything urging her to flee, she stayed. There was something about him that made her believe they could survive this, something that made her believe he knew what to do. Without warning, Darian moved with incredible speed, darting toward a corner of the cave where a small cache of supplies was hidden. He grabbed a few things, quickly assembling a new set of tools that Zira couldn't quite recognize. She had no time to ask questions. He moved with precision, as if every moment was planned, every movement calculated. "Stay quiet," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm going to hold them off. They're not getting you." Zira stared at him, unsure of how to react. She didn't know what he planned to do. She didn't know what he was capable of. All she knew was that she had to trust him, because he was the only chance they had. The alien soldiers were closing in. Zira could hear their voices now, low and threatening. As they approached the entrance, She could barely make out their language, but she didn't need to understand the words. The anger, the malice in their tones was enough. They wanted her, and they would stop at nothing to find her. Darian moved to the edge of the cave entrance, his body pressed against the cold stone, his weapon ready. Zira held her breath as he waited. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time since they had met, Zira saw something in him that she had not expected. The calmness of someone who had faced death before, and had come out victorious. A shadow fell across the mouth of the cave, and Zira's heart seemed to freeze in her chest. The alien soldiers were right outside. Darian's voice was barely a whisper. "When I say run, you run. Don't stop until you're far enough away." Zira nodded without thinking. The words "don't stop" echoed in her mind, but she didn't know if she could make it. The soldiers were trained to track her, to find her no matter where she went. She had always been alone, always fought alone. But now, with Darian at her side, there was a strange feeling deep within her. A sense that maybe, just maybe, they could escape. The first alien soldier stepped into the cave, his weapon raised. His eyes scanned the area, and Zira held her breath, praying that Darian would act in time. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had frozen. The soldier's eyes briefly met hers, but before he could make a move, Darian struck. In one swift motion, he fired a shot that hit the soldier squarely in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. But there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the soldiers rushed in, their weapons firing in a coordinated attack. Zira flinched, but Darian was already moving again, faster than she could follow. His weapon was a blur, and the soldiers were falling, one after another, but they kept coming. More soldiers, more weapons. It was too much. Zira could feel the weight of hopelessness begin to creep in. But then, Darian's voice cut through the chaos. "Now, Zira." It was the signal she had been waiting for. Zira didn't hesitate. She turned and ran, her feet pounding the ground. Her breath ragged in her chest. She didn't look back. All she could do was run. As she sprinted through the forest, the sounds of battle faded, but the fear in her chest didn't. The alien soldiers were still after them. But now, with Darian's courage and strength guiding her, she wasn't running alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, they would survive this. The fight for survival. The forest seemed to close in around Zira as she ran. Her feet pounded the earth, the sound of her breath loud in her ears. Behind her, the distant shouts and blasts from the alien soldiers grew fainter, but she knew it wasn't over. She could feel their presence lingering like a shadow creeping ever closer. They weren't far behind. But there was something else, something more important than just running. The human, Darian, was beside her, moving swiftly through the dense underbrush. He wasn't just running from the soldiers. He was leading them, guiding her, setting a path that kept them one step ahead. Every choice he made was calculated, every move precise. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't afraid. Zira had always thought she could survive on her own. She had learned from the harshest teachers, the unforgiving wilderness, the cruel alien forces, the lies her people had believed. But now she saw survival through a new lens. Survival wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about something more, something Darian had. They reached the edge of a small ravine, the ground sloping downward into a thick fog. Zira hesitated, unsure of the next move. The sound of the soldiers was growing louder, their footsteps quicker, more urgent. "Jump," Darian said suddenly, his voice steady and calm. Zira looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What?" "Trust me. We're going to jump. It's the only way they won't catch us," Darian said, taking a step back to prepare himself. Without waiting for an explanation, he leaped over the edge of the ravine, disappearing into the mist below. For a split second, Zira considered running in the opposite direction. She didn't know this human, didn't know if she could trust him completely. But the way he had fought for her, the way he had protected her, maybe she could. maybe she had to. With a deep breath, she followed him. The jump was farther than she had expected, but somehow her feet found solid ground. She stumbled, nearly losing her balance, but managed to steady herself. The thick mist surrounded her, and she could barely see a few feet in front of her. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. But Darian's steady presence was the only thing that kept her grounded. He was somewhere ahead of her, waiting for her to catch up. When she finally reached him, he didn't waste any time. "Keep moving," he said, his voice urgent but calm. "We have to get to higher ground. They'll track us here, but if we climb, they'll have a harder time following." Zira nodded, pushing herself forward, her muscles burning. They moved quickly through the fog, climbing upward, the sounds of the soldiers' pursuit echoing through the trees. The path was narrow and treacherous, the rocks slippery from moisture, but Darian seemed to know exactly where to step, guiding her carefully. Finally, they reached the top of a ridge, the fog thinning out just enough for them to see the surrounding landscape. Zira took a deep breath, her lungs aching from the effort. She hadn't realized how much running and climbing they had done until now. She felt like her body was ready to give up, but Darian didn't slow down. "We're not safe yet," he said, looking toward the horizon. His eyes narrowed. "They'll be here soon. We have to prepare." Zira looked around. The landscape was barren, the trees sparse. But ahead of them, in the distance, she saw something. Shapes moving in the mist. Alien soldiers. They had found their trail. Panic gripped her chest, but Darian was already moving. He unslung a pack from his shoulder and started pulling out various tools. Zira watched as he worked quickly, setting up something she couldn't yet understand. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Darian didn't look up from his work. "I'm setting a trap. They'll come, and when they do, they'll wish they hadn't." Zira's eyes widened. She had seen traps before, but none like this. Darian was methodical, almost surgical, in his actions. Every step, every placement seemed part of a larger plan that she couldn't yet comprehend. "You really think this will stop them?" she asked, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. Darian paused, looking her in the eye for the first time in what felt like hours. There was something about the way he looked at her, steadfast, unwavering, that made her believe him. "It has to. If we don't make it work, we'll be outnumbered and outgunned. This is our only shot." Zira didn't fully understand, but she knew one thing for sure. Darian wasn't just surviving. He was fighting. He was fighting for her, for both of them. He wasn't going to let the alien forces take them down without a fight. And for the first time since they had met, Zira realized something else. She was ready to fight too. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The alien soldiers were coming closer. They had no time left. She didn't have the training or the weapons Darian had, but she had something else. She had her will to survive. Darian finished setting the last part of the trap, and without a word, he motioned for Zira to take her place. The fog thickened again, the sounds of the soldiers growing louder, closer. As the first alien soldier stepped into view, Zira's heart pounded in her chest. It was now or never. And together, they would fight. The secret revealed. The trap had worked, but not without cost. The alien soldiers were no longer a threat, at least for now. But the battle had left them both exhausted. Zira's legs ached, her body bruised from the harsh climb, and the fight, but she couldn't rest. Not yet. Darian had moved quickly, his sharp eyes scanning the aftermath of their survival. He made sure the trap had done its job, checking the surroundings with the kind of vigilance that Zira had come to expect from him. But even in victory, he was unshaken, unrelenting. Zira sat against a boulder, her mind racing as she tried to piece together everything that had happened. The fight had been intense, and she was still trying to catch her breath, but there was something gnawing at her, something that didn't sit right. She couldn't put it into words, but she knew something was missing. Something about Darian's calm demeanor, his ability to stay 2 steps ahead of everything. Felt different. He was more than just a survivor, more than just a soldier. He wasn't just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. There was something deeper, something hidden beneath his steady gaze. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Zira asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Darian paused, not looking up from the gear he was adjusting. "Tell you what? Tell me what you really are," she pressed, her voice stronger now. "You've been helping me all this time, but you're not just a random human. You've been trained for this. You know things I don't. You knew about the alien forces long before I did." Darian finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence, an uncomfortable quiet that seemed to hang in the air between them. Zira didn't back down. She needed to know. She couldn't keep running without understanding what she was really up against. He sighed softly, setting the weapon down and looking at her with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not just a wanderer. I'm not just here by accident. I'm part of a group of humans who've been sent to protect this galaxy from forces much worse than the one that's after you." Zira's brow furrowed. "A group? Who are they?" Darian ran a hand through his hair, his eyes distant as he gathered his thoughts. "We're not just explorers. We've been sent by a faction of humans who've seen the danger your people are in. We've been watching from the shadows, trying to stop the war before it spreads too far. I'm part of an elite task force. Our mission is to protect innocent lives. Lives like yours." Zira blinked, trying to process the revelation. She had thought she understood what was happening, that the alien forces were just another enemy to survive. But this was something different. Humans, protecting her people. She didn't know what to believe. "You knew about this war before it even reached my people?" she asked, her voice shaky with disbelief. Darian nodded slowly. "It's not just your world that's at risk. This war has been brewing for years, and the alien forces that are after you, they're just one part of it. We've been tracking them, trying to stop their spread before they destroy everything." Zira felt a chill creep down her spine. "And you're telling me this now?" Her voice wavered between anger and confusion. "You've been watching, waiting, while my people suffered, while they tried to kill me." "I didn't have a choice," Darian said, his voice quiet but firm. "We had to stay in the shadows. We had to wait for the right moment. We didn't want to risk revealing ourselves too soon. But the moment I saw you, I knew you were important. You're not just some runaway. You're a key to stopping this war." Zira's head spun as she tried to piece together his words. He was part of a larger mission. He wasn't just protecting her. He was protecting everyone, maybe even the entire galaxy. But the more she thought about it, the more questions rose. "Why me?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why is my life so important? What am I supposed to do?" Darian stepped closer, his gaze meeting hers with intensity. "You're not alone in this. There's more to you than you realize, Zira. Your people have been lied to, controlled by the very forces that are now hunting you. The truth is, you're part of something much bigger. Your role in this war is not by accident." Zira's mind reeled. She had always believed her life had no meaning, that she was just one person running from an enemy that wanted her dead. But now, Darian's words painted a different picture, one where she wasn't just a victim, but a part of something far larger than herself. For the first time since meeting him, Zira realized the gravity of the situation. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a player in a much bigger game. And the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. "So what now?" she asked, her voice steady now, as she met Darian's gaze. "What do we do next?" Darian paused for a moment, as if weighing his options. Then he spoke with a finality that left no room for doubt. "Now we stop them. We take the fight to them. And we make sure they never get another chance to destroy everything." The unexpected alliance. The planet's sky was a deep shade of purple as the two of them stood together at the edge of the ruined battlefield. The fight had been fierce, But now, as the dust settled, the air around them seemed impossibly still. Zira's breath was shallow, her body exhausted, but she stood tall. She had never imagined she would find herself in such a position, fighting alongside a human, against impossible odds. And yet, here they were. Beside her, Darian checked his gear one last time, his movements precise and practiced. There was a certain finality to everything now, a quiet tension that hung in the air. The soldiers that had come to hunt her were defeated, but their mission was far from over. The true enemy, the one pulling the strings, was still out there, and Zira knew they would stop at nothing to bring her down. Zira's mind raced as she turned to Darian. "This isn't over, is it?" Darian didn't answer right away. He simply gazed into the distance, his eyes locked on the horizon, where the last remnants of the alien forces were retreating. The battle had left them both with more questions than answers, and Zira knew they couldn't rest yet. "No," Darian finally said, his voice soft but resolute. "It's just beginning." For a moment, Zira didn't speak. She had spent her whole life running from danger, running from the truth, running from the people who wanted her dead. But now, standing at Darian's side, the weight of the future felt different. It wasn't something to fear anymore. It was something to face. Her eyes narrowed, her posture straightening with newfound determination. "Then we face it together." Darian glanced at her, his gaze unreadable. The faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's the plan." Zira felt something stir inside her, a realization that she was no longer just a survivor. She had been given a second chance, a chance to fight back, a chance to protect the people she had once thought she didn't matter to. And with Darian by her side, she felt something else too, a quiet trust, built through every challenge they had faced together. He had shown her a side of humanity she had never known before, a side that wasn't just about survival, but about fighting for something bigger, fighting for hope. Together, they turned their backs on the battlefield and began to walk toward the unknown, their path stretching out before them like a promise. The road ahead would be treacherous, filled with enemies and dangers they couldn't yet imagine, but there was no going back. Not now. Not ever. "So," Zira said, breaking the silence as they walked, "where do we go from here?" Darian glanced at her, the hint of a smile still lingering. "We go to where it all started, to the heart of their power. We take the fight to them." Zira nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. This was the beginning of something much larger than herself, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. The stars above twinkled brightly in the sky, the first sign of the new world they would face together. Zira wasn't just an alien on the run anymore. She was a warrior, an ally, and a part of something bigger, a force that would take on the galaxy's greatest threats, side by side with the human who had saved her life and shown her what it truly meant to fight for something worth protecting. The adventure had only just begun.